which I know is a very hot take, that I like
Blasphemy.
this one more.
Literarily.
And happy Pride Month. Welcome to episode 11 of Like Literarily. If you don't remember, I'm Alexis or Momo, and I run Momo's bookshelf.
I'm Rylee from Rylee Tries Hobbies.
And I'm Alicia.
And today we're talking about another Casey McQuiston novel. As you may all know, Casey McQuiston also wrote Red, White, and Royal Blue, which came out in 2019. One Last Stop, the one we're talking about today, came out in 2021. And I Kissed Shara Wheeler came out in 2022. And The Pairing, Casey McQuiston's fourth novel, is set to release this August. Now, the reason we chose Casey McQuiston, not just because they wrote Red, White, and Royal Blue, but because they're a representative of the LGBTQ community, and it is Pride Month. And their books are also centered on main characters as well that are queer. So to start this segment off, since it is Pride Month, and being a bit of a history buff, and One Last Stop having a few historical references to LGBTQ history, I want to give a quick little background to the LGBTQ rights movement. There is a long and complicated history behind it that I won't get into too deeply, but recommend researching if you haven't before. Also to note, I did Google which variation of the term is correct, and one of them is LGBTQ, so that is the one I'm going to be using today. And let's get started. So the community, as we all know, has always existed. History shows that the people of this community have been around since the beginning of time, but deep and dark external factors have affected the ability to remain safe while being out. For the sake of the time and the focus of the podcast being on One Last Stop, I will focus more on providing some key events of the modern day LGBTQ rights movement, which is often stated to have truly begun in 1969. And to kind of tie this a little bit more into the topic of the podcast today, one of our main characters was actually present during the 1970s, despite most of the novel taking place in present day. So let's quickly survey the landscape of the LGBTQ movement around that time. So starting in 1963, we have the first gay rights demonstration in the United States taking place in New York City for military discrimination, something that, if you didn't know, took until 2010 when the 1994 Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy would be repealed. Then in 1966, we have the Compton Cafeteria riot in San Francisco, California, after trans women were arrested for breaking quote-unquote gendered clothing laws, and some of those laws wouldn't be overturned until as late as 2011. 1969, we have the most and essentially the trigger event to the modern day LGBTQ rights movement, which was the Stonewall Uprising in New York City, a 4-day confrontation between police and protesters. This leads us to, on the first anniversary of it, 1970, which is the first Pride Parade that takes place. And as we all know, they're still happening to this day. 1973, we have the Upstairs Lounge Fire, which is actually mentioned in the book we're going to talk about today, it occurred on June 24th, 1973 at a gay bar in New Orleans, Louisiana, and is still considered one of the deadliest attacks on the community in U.S. history. In 77, just to note, we have the Save Our Children campaign, which was a group that was formed to try to overturn the outlaws against discrimination in the areas of housing, employment, and public accommodation based on sexual orientation. This would be a political fight that we still see to this day. In 1978, another gay icon, Harvey Milk, was actually elected and became the first openly gay city official in California history. He was assassinated only 11 months later in November of 1978. It's crazy to me. He had served the country in the Navy from 1951 to 1955. From 1987 to 2020, which I know is a pretty big gap of time, but just for the sake of, getting to talking about the book and its historical references today, you have things like the Defense of Marriage Act that gets passed, which wouldn't be overturned until 2015 when the Supreme Court would strike down the state bans on same-sex marriage, legalizing it in all 50 states. The International Transgender Day of Visibility would get established. The Stonewall National Monument would get established. And the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida would occur, and the Supreme Court would rule to protect LGBTQ employees. I'm sure that there are a ton more and known and unknown pieces of monumental history in the LGBTQ movement, as well as just the everyday fight across the world to be a part of this community and be safe. And we could talk about it forever. So I encourage you to do your own research, even if you don't identify as somebody in that community, because now more than ever in this piece of time, it is important to be an ally just as much. So now, to bring us to the main idea of the episode today, is one last stop. Rylee, would you care to tell us about the book?
I would love to tell everybody about the book. As a warning, we do spoilers here. So if you have not read this yet, please turn off the podcast and come back later and after you read this lovely book. All right. Heading into the summary, I did pull this from the Story Graph. As we know, this is my favorite bookish app. All right, so let's get into the summary. For cynical 23-year-old August Landry, moving to New York City is supposed to prove her right that things like magic and cinematic love stories don't exist, and the only way to go through life is alone. She can't imagine how waiting tables at a 24-hour pancake diner and moving in with too many weird roommates could possibly change that. And there's certainly no chance of her subway commute being anything more than daily trudge through boredom and electrical failures. But then there's this gorgeous girl on the train. Jane is dazzling, charming, and mysterious with her rough edges and swoopy hair, and her soft smile. She shows up in a leather jacket to save August's day when she needed it the most. Jane ends up becoming August's subway crush and the highlight of her day. However, what she doesn't know is that Jane is misplaced from the 1970s, and August is going to have to use everything he tried to leave in her own past to help her. Maybe it's time to start believing in some things after all.
And I think like towards the book summary, the hope aspect was so well portrayed throughout the entire book. August's character development is really palpable. She transitions from this character who feels extremely disconnected from the world. There's a lot of irony there that's not lost with Jane's situation. But then in the end, August has embraced this chosen family of friends that really allows her to push past her comfort zones and experiences this personal growth. And I also love that we see this growth with the friend group and the love interest, not just that love interest throughout this book. So let's talk about it a little bit more. Alexis, what did you think of the book?
I enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting the supernatural twist because I did not read the back of the book before I started it.
I am also terrible at reading the back of the book. I almost never do. Like if somebody's recommended a book to me, I just check it out and I read nothing about it. And then we find out what kind of ride we're on as we're reading it. And like, I also did not know this was going to be a romantasy book. And I felt like the fantasy was so well like interwoven into the story. Like it was just the right level of fantasy world building that the supernatural vibe was coming through, but I wasn't feeling like I was getting disconnected from the book because they tried to be too much of a fantasy book while being a romance book, because that's happened to me before where I'm like, yo, you have so many plot holes in this like fantasy plot line. But that wasn't the case here. And then for the romance side, like I genuinely didn't know if they were going to end up with a happily ever after. And honestly, I think taking that approach with the romance really complemented that fantasy supernatural plot. I don't know. I think it just flowed really well. And there's like a ton of other subplots like going on at the same time. And I think it just came together really well at the end.
No, I totally agree with you. I also am team judge the book by its cover, not going to lie. I try not to read the back because it's more fun to like not know what's going to happen sometimes. But I agree. I think the book came together really nicely. I know like during the fall and spooky season, I love books that have like a hint of magic in them but are still like set in the real world, kind of like have you read the book The XX? It's like modern day, but there's also like a witch college and stuff. And this kind of gave me, or like Practical Magic, like the movie. I didn't read the book for that one yet, but it's just like the real world with like magic in it. And this gave me the same vibes, even though there is no witches in this book. It's just magical sprinkles and stuff. But I don't know. I thought it ended up being like a really realistic love story, like chemistry wise. Obviously not the magic part. But I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. It gave me good feelings and good vibes, and it only gave me the ick like once, and that was when she told us her bagel order, which was chocolate chip and peanut butter. But Casey McQuiston did save themselves by like calling her out by saying how sacrilegious that bagel order was. for a tri-state area girly, because I do not believe in sweet bagels. Just eat a donut. I will say it did give me the ew when they would do stuff on the subway in a public place on a nasty ass subway in New York City, because that place is icky. But it only gave me the ew.
Like the whole lightning storm scene on the subway was like, this is good, but it's on the subway. Like, ew, ew, ugh.
The way the entire time I was trying to sit there and have an image in my head of how that was going down, and I just couldn't do it. And then like the lightning thing happened, and like the only thing that could come to my mind was the fourth wing scene with Violet and Xaden. But I could not put this on a subway. I was like, where are they? Are they on a bench? Where are they hidden? Where is this happening? Did they find where like a bathroom? Where is the space? Like, I had so many questions trying to picture this.
Man, I just imagine they were vibing against the window. Because it was like
that's fair.
3 a.m. or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like they didn't use the term witching hour, but it was like some random time during the night. But yeah, it surprisingly did not give me the ick. It just gave me the ew.
No ick.
I was able to get past that, which is very surprising for me. That's usually an ick. But I don't know. They were in love. It made up for it for me. But the bagel order, if Casey didn't like explain that one, that would have been a major ick. So priorities are the food above the, public indecency for whatever reason in my brain.
Yeah, so I actually told some friends this, but I really loved the book when I had it in my hand. But when I wasn't reading it, I wasn't really rushing to get back to it. Like, oh, let me hurry up and like get everything I need to do for work done. So that's honestly why I couldn't completely give this like the same rating that I gave like Red Wine Royal Blue, even though they're not related literally in any way, shape, or form. But I don't know if you guys noticed this, and I'm sure you probably did, but the diversity in all of Casey McQuiston's books I've read so far, which I've only read 2 out of the 3 that are out and the 4 that are in this space somewhere because the 4th one hasn't been released yet. But Casey McQuiston is a genius at placing diversity into their stories perfectly. It rarely feels out of place, random to the story, oversaturated, or unclear. And I mean unclear in the way that I think Alicia's talked about this in our past episodes before, where the author will only say something along the lines of like, oh, he was so hot with how he was tall and his dark skin. Like, okay, what the hell does that mean? From race to gender, identity to sexual orientation to even the background of as a whole of the character, like class or age or whatever. I feel like all of Casey's characters and their story and identity plus just the personality honestly just give me the ability to get to know them on an actual real level and as Casey intended to write them and bring them to life. And I just think they are one of the best authors to this day that does diversity well and very intentionally, and I really love that.
I completely agree. I think when they write, they do it very intentionally and it makes it in a way that's very natural. Like I honestly didn't think about it until I was like doing my Storygraph review and they were like, is the cast of this book diverse? And I was like, yes, very, very much so. Very diverse. But I didn't like think about it the whole time I was reading it. It was just like part of the story, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think the only time I ever thought about anything while reading this with something and associating it to something that I maybe quote unquote disliked was that I think that there was a little bit of plot armor around everything working out for August and how everything somehow connected. But I understood that that was the probable intention of Casey because of the fact that like it gave August the ability to have faith again, and it kind of ties into what Alicia was saying with like this being more of a little bit of like a romantic kind of vibe. And then when the book mentioned the Pittsburgh Steelers and Brendan Fraser from The Mummy, I was like, I'm in. Like I literally just kept reading. Like even though it was so random to the story, it was once again like those little details that made me get to know the character as if I was getting to know a new friend. And so I really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot.
For me, I feel like those little like quips about like pop culture and stuff like make it more relatable, more real. Like, will it date the book in 10 years? Yeah, probably. Do I care? No, it makes me happy. I think I said the same thing about Funny Story. Anywho, but I will say Brandon Fraser is a babe, and the amount of memes me and my friend Sarah send each other about him is slightly concerning. So totally on the same boat as you.
Brendan
Blix.
Fraser is such a babe. I will absolutely be naming if I ever had kids, they would be named after his character and Evelyn from The Mummy. Like, I grew up watching those. They're amazing. 10 out of 10
Iconic.
reference.
Y'all, not me sitting here Googling who Brendan Fraser is.
Oh my gosh.
Alicia, sacrilegious.
Oh.
Again. No, you're good. You're good. We know you don't watch movies. It's okay.
Movies are not my forte. But I do read books, so I have an opinion. Obviously, part of the reason I'm part of this trio.
And it's a valid opinion, Alicia. Never let anybody tell you different.
Thanks. But yeah, this is my least favorite Casey McQuiston book. But it's still a really good book. She really does not miss. I love the diversity. I think that's why I like all of her books so much. For me, the reason why this was my least favorite out of the 3 she's published so far was the first quarter is quite slow. It's a little monotonous. We're getting a lot of August's life and like her trying to figure out what's going on with Jane. But even after that first quarter, it still took like halfway through the book until it got to a point, like Alexis said, where I didn't feel like, oh, am I going to pick this back up kind of situation. The reason it ended up pulling out as still a good book for me was that because of the slowness, you actually believe that like August and Jane's relationship was very meaningful and that like they were falling in love. Like it wasn't just like instantaneous love at first sight type situation. Like August was on the queue constantly talking to Jane, and the book made sure you knew that. And so you knew they were really like creating this deep connection. And I did like that slow burn aspect. So maybe I'm just contradicting myself, but the book read slow and I liked the slow burn, and the slow burn ended up overruling for me that the book read slow. Is that too confusing?
No, I get what you mean. So as somebody who really likes the monotonous part of books where people are just like living life, it's like really a vibe for me. I find it very relaxing. I really like this book. I actually liked it more than Red, White, and Royal Blue. Red, White, and Royal Blue for me was like a 4. This one I would give a 4.25. See, I'm the one who's being crazy now. But ironically, the book with the magical realism felt more real to me, and I feel like I just connected more with the characters. I mean, those little quips about pop culture, I think, help with me just to like immerse myself in the story. And I don't know, I like the monotony. It's like so fun and relaxing, and I really enjoy it.
You're saying a book with supernatural aspects felt more real than having a woman president?
That is the times we live in. That is a fair point, though.
Something that kind of the both of you said today made me think of something. So I actually ended up rating this 4.5 out of, or like 4.75 out of 5, simply just because of the fact that like me and Alicia were talking about when I didn't have it in my hand, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, let me hurry up and get back to this. But I will say something that you guys said did get my brain moving. So kind of even like with the podcast of last month about the idea of you and like, is a romance story a happy ending or not? I have to say, I don't think I found the ending completely predictable because honestly, I thought she was going to go back. Like, I really thought that Jane was going to go back, be back in the 70s, and then August was going to like look something up, and it was going to be like she did some crazy stuff at one of these events from history, and Jane was actually going to be like a part of it. And then that's not what happened. When she came back, I'm not going to say I was slightly disappointed, but I was actually kind of slightly disappointed.
So you said exactly what you said you weren't going to say, but yes.
Yeah. Like when she came back, I was like, oh. I guess this feeds into our does a romance novel have to have a happily ever after? Because I feel like her going back and being a huge part of history would have been like a really dope ending, but it is what it is. It was only my second Casey McQuiston book with Red, White, and Royal Blue, like I said, still taking the cake. Haha. And I will be reading I Kiss Shara Wheeler, and I will probably go and pre-order The Pairing. I think Casey has made their way to being an auto-buy author for me, personally.
Which, talking about like, will or won't Jane go back to the past? I think that was definitely a question I was asking myself the entire time. And just like harp a little bit more on what I liked about the book, and I stated like this idea of hope I felt like was really well done for the overall story. But like Jane and August kind of had this like parallel inverse type situation thing going on where like Jane's easily connecting with people and wants relationships with different people that she meets, and that's how she had lived her life like back in the 70s, and that's how she was living her life on the queue, even though like people would never see her again because she's like basically a ghost. And meanwhile, August is over there, like not nurturing relationships, who's feeling like pretty disconnected and feels lost and cautious about like what she's doing. And she's like in the real world. And so you're like experiencing these two people that are kind of like at odds and just like trying to find themselves. And I like that parallelism throughout the storyline.
No, I agree. I think just going back to my earlier point that Casey really thought this book out. Like, there's a scene in the book where August is like, I mean, the whole book, August is like hella organized. Like, she's very detailed. She makes very detailed plans and notes and outlines and everything else. And there's one scene in the book where August put like everything up on a wall and was like, all I need is some string and I could go full NCIS. I feel like that was Casey when she was outlining this story just to make it like as cohesive, and like they wanted it to all come together at the end, and they definitely accomplished that, and it made me happy. I know like it was like a little predictable. The book was definitely a lot predictable actually, other than like will Jane like leave or will she like stay in like the past or present, whatever. But that didn't bother me for lack of a better term. Like I was just like happy to go through with the story and have that happy ending at the end. I still don't think it's necessary for a romance, but I'm glad with how it ended personally. It got me, feeling the warm and fuzzies inside.
Man, I'm so excited for you two to read I Kissed Shara Wheeler because it's a romance, obviously. But so like this one was supernatural vibes. That one is like mystery vibes. So if you're thinking she's already connecting the red string across the photos on the wall, just wait.
Heck yeah, Casey, I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
Me too.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up our discussion on One Last Stop. So we'll be honest, most likely you're going to hear more from Casey McQuiston on Like Literarily.
Yeah, you'll definitely be hearing more from Casey McQuiston because RWRB2 was released, or excuse me, the release was announced, and Casey is helping write the script. So more Nikki G for me.
I completely forgot about that, even though it's literally in the notes in front of me.
How do we make Nicholas Galzatine come up in every episode at least once?
So here's the announcement. Episode 12 next month is actually going to be 30 minutes of me talking about fun facts about Nicholas Galitzine. Just kidding. Episode 12 will actually be picked out by you, our listeners. Make sure you check out our Instagram or send us a message to vote on the book options provided by each of our significant others.
Yeah, each of our partners have given us their favorite books, and you're all going to decide which one we should end up reading and reviewing on the next episode. We are only doing one because these books are wildly different, as you'll see in the poll.
That's okay. One book is probably enough from boy books. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Bye, friends. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I have a cue. I thought I was done.